Hi, I'm Laurie Itkin, a certified divorce financial analyst practicing throughout California. You can find me at theoptionslady.com. And I'm here today with Kelly Myers, who is a certified divorce coach, a mediator, and a co-parenting specialist. And today we are going to talk about how to address infidelity and betrayal when you're going through divorce.
I think it's such an important topic. It is one that carries with it a lot of emotions, which creates a lot of conflict, which, as we both know, conflict often equals a lot more expense, a lot more time, which both of those things create a lot more emotional and mental costs, right?
Absolutely.
So it is a really important topic. I think the thing we need to have people understand is when they are going through a situation like that, it is critical that they have support, that they have emotional support to get through this, to work with somebody who is not only well versed in infidelity issues, but also in divorce. And so working with somebody like myself, who's a divorce coach, or working with a therapist who, again, has that expertise in the divorce part of things, because that's really critical when you're going
Yeah,
through.
because it's not just working on the marriage, dealing with infidelity in the marriage, which is very common. Obviously, one of the marriage and family therapists work on these issues all the time. But when you're going through a divorce, it takes a turn because you're not trying to repair the relationship. Of course, you want to still be good co-parents if you have children, but what we have found in our experience, and we've worked with clients together as a team, is that often the person who has been cheated on wants revenge, retaliation, to be made whole. And there's an emotional component. How do you become emotionally whole, but also how do you become financially whole? So why don't you talk a little bit more about working through those emotions to have a divorce that is actually going to be as efficient and least horrible as possible.
Right. Well, for everybody, it's different. Again, what I want to stress is getting support. And I think friends and family is a really good starting place for support and for emotional support. But when it comes to support and managing those emotions while going through divorce, because that's yet another loss, right? So you got a double whammy at once. Um, I believe that it's critical that you've got a professional to guide you through that. And part of working through that is really understanding what the courts look at when you have these
Mm.
situations, right? It's incredibly personal and emotional for the individual, but the courts don't look at those things. Particularly in California, it's a no-fault state. So they're just really looking at numbers and the law. They're
That's right.
not.
And we've had situations where the client has said, I should get more assets because, I took care of the kids all these years. I supported his job. In this case, I'm using the traditional the roles. But or my my ex-spouse needs to pay spousal support forever, right?
Whatever.
I deserve it, I need it, I've been wronged, I've been betrayed, and god darn it, he's going to pay.
Absolutely. And again, there's a space to get that, to work through that trauma of all of that. But there's also, I believe, one of the best ways to start managing emotion is getting information,
Mhm.
accurate information, and then taking that information and understanding, really turning that into knowledge for your situation, right? Because the information you get, the way that the courts look at things, it impacts everybody's situation differently. So the first thing that I advise all people to do is really to understand the realities. What are the realities of infidelity and its impact, when it comes to what the courts look at?
Mhm.
Um, we are big proponents of mediation, right?
Yes,
And
we
so
are.
I strongly encourage people to seek mediation first, really, regardless of the situation. Mediation can handle all sorts of issues the key to it is making sure that you have a mediator who has expertise in whatever unique situation you've got going on. But I do talk about the courts because I think it's important to understand what the courts do as a baseline.
Mhm.
And
And
just
frankly, in California in particular, assets will not be divided differently and spousal support will not be determined differently because one spouse had an affair.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly. And knowing
that's
that
the reality, Kelly.
it is, right. And knowing that going into it is going to help you avoid more emotions as you're fighting for something that you're not going to get, right? More conflict. And this conflict, particularly if you have children, is going to trickle down to them. And that's what's going to be a negative impact on them, not the divorce,
Absolutely.
the conflict that goes on.
So there is a financial remedy in certain cases, and especially in mediation, this can work very well. So there's a concept, again, in California about fiduciary duty. And so really, when you're married, you know, again, this is sort of, it's very subjective, but you really have an obligation to protect community assets, right? You're not supposed to gamble them away or do stupid things. And so if somebody's had, let's say, an 18-month affair and there were bills paid, you know, travel expenses, meals out, you know, gifts. So that, if that can be quantified, that can be reimbursed to the community. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we find that, you know, John has spent $10,000 on an affair, okay? That means that if he reimburses $10,000 to the community and you're John's wife, Kelly, it's like him paying you $5,000, okay? So it's a community reimbursement. And what we've done in mediation several times is say, hey, John, and I don't want to pick on the men here, okay? All right, we've seen all genders do this. But hey, John, would you go through your credit card statements and would you, without providing details to your ex, which is going to, you know, really, yes, do your best guess to say, this is what I spent. Because you know what? When you give the cheater the task to do that, it's really interesting. They're usually pretty close. Okay. Now, otherwise, if you don't believe John, you can hire me, Laurie Itkin, as a CDFA to go and request bank statements and credit card statements from John. But why not give John a chance to do it himself? And they usually rise to the occasion.
Well, and I love that. I think that's absolutely true. And what I love about it is that you talked about being able to do that in mediation. I think so often people feel like the only way they can get something like that is if they litigate and they go to court. And that's just not true. To be fair, sometimes that may be the only way, but I think we both would say we encourage you to try mediation first.
Absolutely.
To try that option.
And in that example where there's a reimbursement to the community, I want to go back to what we were saying earlier, is that doesn't mean you're going to get 60 or 70% of the assets. That doesn't mean you're going to get spousal support for life. Now, I know it's a little bit, it's you know, a little reimbursement that really isn't meaningful, but it is a symbolic gesture in that you really want the spouse to acknowledge that they've done this and they've hurt you. And by having a token payment, you know, you're getting some acknowledgement. It's not the whole enchilada, but I hope that's useful in healing.
Absolutely. And what I would say is that your best bet from a financial perspective is to try to work out these issues in mediation, because it's likely you're going to spend more than you ever would have gotten in reimbursements. You're going to spend more, you know, that may not allow you to keep the house or to buy a new residence, because you're going to be paying your attorneys an exorbitant amount of money to litigate these issues when you probably can resolve most of them while in mediation.
Don't forget about the forensic accounting fees.
Oh,
in addition to the
I had to pay those. I know exactly what those fees are.
Yes, you went through it. Well, Kelly, how can people reach you if they'd like to learn more about how you can work with them?
You can reach me at my company is called First Steps Divorce. So it's just firststepsdivorce.com. I do offer free consultations, and I really encourage everybody to take advantage of that. What I find is even if you can just spend 30 minutes with me or somebody like Lori, I think it takes the temperature down a little bit. It gives you a little bit more information. It takes away a little bit of that fear. And I think that allows you to enter into this process much more centered, much more intentional, and being able to make far better strategic decisions.
Wonderful, wonderful advice, Kelly. Thanks so much.
Thank you.